Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 7 of the Oregon Conference FMX class. This week, we're going to be looking at the English Reformation and what came out of that were issues around church structure and governance. In other words, what we call ecclesiology. So this week, we're going to be looking a lot at how the Free Methodist Church is structured, who reports to who, very ins and outs, dull, boring, procedural stuff along the way. So let's start. We start here, the English Reformation. This is a monastery not far from where I grew up. It's near a place called Ripon in Yorkshire. This is Fountains Abbey. Once upon a time, it was a powerhouse monastery for the Cistercian order of monks. Today, though, as you can see, it is a ruin, a very well kept ruin by the National Trust. But it has been a ruin now for nearly 500 years, thanks to the work of one Henry VIII, who is going to cause the Reformation to happen in England. We've already looked at how there are several Reformations. We have looked at how there are magisterial and radical Reformations, how there was Luther's Reformation, Calvin's Reformation, Zwingli's Reformation. There was the Catholic Counter-Reformation. This is the English Reformation. And this becomes the most important Reformation to us as Methodists, because Methodism is going to come out of English Anglicanism, out of Church of England background. What in America survives as the Episcopal Church. Methodism is going to come out of the Church of England. And so of all the Reformations, this is the one that's going to have the most impact on who we are. So let's find out about it. First of all, let's start off with this figure, Henry VIII. Even though he would lead the charge against the Catholic Church in England, he actually started off initially as a hero to the Catholic Church. So Henry was the King of England from 1509 until 1547, and he married Catherine of Aragon, who was a Spaniard. This created a powerful union between England and Spain, at that point two Catholic countries, and was thought to secure really some good political gains. And she gives birth to a daughter, Mary, who would later earn the name Bloody Mary. And Henry defends the Catholic Church. In fact, he writes against Martin Luther. And the Pope grants an official title to Henry for his work defending the Catholic Church against the Reformation on the continent. And he gives Henry the title Fidei Defensor. Now, even after the Reformation, this is a title that King of England's and Queens of England too kept as part of their claim to the legitimacy of being head of the church, which we'll get to in a minute. So this picture shows the back of a British pound coin. They've changed it this year, but the text is still the same on the new ones. And if you go around the Queen's head, you'll see it says Elizabeth II, DG Reg, FD 2003. So that says Elizabeth II, Deo Gloria Regina, by the glory of God Queen, Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith. So it's still a title used for the kings and queens of England to this day. So this is where Henry started as a Catholic hero. But he would become a Catholic enemy, mostly because of his love life. Catherine failed to produce a male heir, and the marriage begins to break down 1527. Now, we all know Henry VIII had 6 wives. At this point, he had been married to Catherine a long time. He was married to Catherine of Aragon longer than his other 5 wives put together, just to give a bit of context to what goes on here. Rome refuses to grant Henry an annulment. Why should they bother? It goes against their teaching. It also threatens politically a union between 2 great Catholic nations at a time when they're facing instability. In 1530, the universities declare Henry's marriage invalid. Remember, at this time, England had become a centre of scholastic learning. People like Erasmus, who you looked at a couple of weeks ago, had done work at Oxford, at Cambridge, universities that were great theological centres of the time. In 1531, Henry declares himself head of the church in England. Between these two things, he is effectively sticking up his middle finger at the Pope in Rome and making sure he gets his way however he can. 1532, the submission of the clergy. Henry literally would take all the bishops of England and he locked them in a room. And he said, you have two conflicting vows. Your vow of loyalty to the Pope and your vow of loyalty to me. Which do you want to follow first? By the way, you're all locked in this room until you say me. If you don't, I will kill you. And so the clergy are basically forced to submit to saying that their vow to Henry is superior to their vow to the Pope. And then Henry secretly marries Anne Boleyn in 1533, so he now has his second wife. In 1534, the Act of Succession declares Mary illegitimate. After all, his marriage had been declared invalid. And the Act of Supremacy makes England a sovereign state. What do we mean by that? It meant that Rome could not legislate anything in England. England is now its own separate state. Its king is head of the church as well as the head of the country. To this day, that is still how it is in England. The Queen is not only the head of the United Kingdom, she is also the head of the Church of England. This is why a Catholic cannot be monarch in England, because of this necessary role as head of the Church of England. And in 1536, Henry dissolves the monasteries. He gets rid of the power base of the Catholic Church and takes all the wealth for himself and the land. And it makes England very rich and very powerful, because all this money that had belonged to the church now belongs to the state. It's what would eventually in time allow Britain to start developing powerful military presence, powerful colonial presence, and build an empire. So a lot comes out of these few years. Now, the Church of England didn't stay static. Now, when Henry created the Church of England, very little changed regarding theology. All the Roman Catholic theology stayed, apart from that Henry was the head of the church, not the Pope. He basically had made himself a Pope. Very little changed theologically. And then along came a guy called Thomas Cranmer, who would become Archbishop of Canterbury. He would push in more Protestant ideals, and partly to help cement Henry's position. He would write, though, what became the 39 Articles. Now, the 39 Articles are the Articles of Religion of the Church of England. They're very broad, and you have a version of them in your Free Methodist Church discipline. The Articles of Religion in your Free Methodist Church discipline are modifications of John Wesley's modifications to the 39 Articles. When John Wesley found Methodism, he took the 39 Articles, trimmed them down, altered a few tweaks, a bit of wording, got out some unnecessary ones, like he felt we didn't have to have the article against purgatory. He thought it was kind of obvious, and having an article about what we don't believe, he felt didn't fit when it's supposed to articles about what we do believe. So there were some alterations like that. When Free Methodist Church was founded, we kind of stuck an emphasis on entire sanctification in there, but basically accepted Wesley's Articles of Religion. So these 39 Articles are the grandfather of our Articles of Religion. They are the bedrock of the belief system that you read when you read that first chapter. And yes, they have influences of Martin Luther and other great historians, but Thomas Cranmer is the one who would actually initially put together these articles of faith that over time would come to us as our articles of faith in the Free Methodist Discipline 2015, nearly half a millennia later. The interesting thing, though, beyond these kind of, you'll notice our articles of religion aren't huge, detailed doctrine. They're just some very broad, sweeping statements. This was because Anglicanism became not just about Christ, but also became about uniting a country. And even today, the Church of England is hugely diverse. You have evangelicals, you have liberals, you have Anglo-Catholics, you have people who are immersion-only baptism, people who are infant baptism, people who are Wesleyan, people who are Calvinist, all under one church. When you think about it in the modern world, that is an absolutely astonishing feat. And this is because the Church of England, whilst holding to a few core things about who God is, that dogma circle that are outlined in the Articles of Religion, they sought unity not through agreement in theology, but through common practice. This is where something called the Book of Common Prayer came in. Everybody would worship in the same way. No matter what their nuances of theology were, their specific thoughts on certain matters, everyone would worship in the same way. It's very difficult for us to think of that with how, especially American evangelicalism has approached faith. But what you've got to understand is this is where our wide umbrella comes in. We looked at right back in week 1 of the course. That wide umbrella, this is where it comes from. Okay? And so to unify, they create the Book of Common Prayer. They also create an English translation of the Bible that was completed whilst King James was king. So we call it the King James Bible. First true English translation of the whole Bible. And so the church evolves and changes slightly. But it's still more Catholic than, for example, Calvin's Reformation was. It's very much in the Magisterial Reformation. So that's the journey of the Church of England in its initial years. The biggest change, though, is that move from being part of Rome to being its own independent church. And so this brings up the issue of church structure and governance. Who relates to who in the church, and how do breaks and things like that come out? So we call this ecclesiology, but also what you're going to notice is we're going to talk a lot about how Free Methodist Church, just like the Methodist Church, just like the Church of England, just like the Roman Catholic Church, just like basically all the churches that sit within the Magisterial Reformation, is an episcopate. And though we have modified the episcopate slightly, we remain that nevertheless. There are a few other forms of church governance, such as congregationalism, which you will find in church families that belong to the Radical Reformation, such as the Baptists or the Anabaptists. There's also the consensus approach of Quakerism. But we belong to the Magisterial Reformation, and we are an episcopate. So what is an episcopate? This is an episcopate, made into a nice little picture for you. So at the bottom there are congregations, lots of little churches, and each church has a priest that's in charge of the church. And in charge of all of those are the bishops. So a bishop has an area of the church, a geographical area, and they're in charge of all the churches in that area. The priests are about the day-to-day tasks of living out the faith. They lead worship services. They do prayer. They take confessions. They do the pastoral care. The bishops, and over them the archbishops, are the seat of theology. Now, there's going to be some really important color coding in this, okay? Wherever you see blue in these coming slides, that is the traditional seat of theology. That is where the bishop role exists. That's going to come in really important when we look at the Free Methodist Church in a bit, and you will see why. These are the people who... Everybody does theology in this thing, but the bishops and the archbishops are the ones that decide this is our theology. this is what we're going to take. When new issues, new things arise, they are the ones that create the official line in things. And in episcopate, there was always a pope or a patriarch. Remember when we looked at the East-West split, there were originally several patriarchs, and Rome just split because it wanted the pope to be a more superior patriarch. So what that would look like, here's our top dog. Here's our seat of theology, our guardians of orthodoxy that are the bishops. And this is, and the benefit of this structure, I forgot this, is that because the bishops are the seat of theology, it releases the church to go do the orthopraxis, to do the mission. Because the bishops sit there and have worked out theology surrounding what it means to do world mission, and it's important, the church can now be mobilized to do it. They're not tied up with all the theological thought around it. They're released to go do it. So that's how a true episcopate works. Now, as I said, once upon a time, there were 5 of these top dogs: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome. Later time, there would be in the east, there would be other patriarchs added. There would be the Armenian Patriarch, the Georgian Patriarch, and the Russian Patriarch. And they kind of worked together, and they had their episcopal structures off them. What happened in the Great Schism is Rome separated from the others. And so Rome created a single episcopacy rather than multiple episcopacies, with this team of patriarchs leading all of them. But it is this single patriarchy that Henry VIII is dealing with when he fights Rome. And all Henry does is one simple change. He scratches out Pope and he puts in monarch. That's it. That's really all Henry VIII does. He scratches out Pope and puts in monarch. As I said, the early evolutions beyond that at the Church of England were people like Thomas Cranmer. Initially, the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England had no difference in theology other than Henry made himself the Pope and said the monarch, whoever the monarch is, will be Pope. DG Reg, by the glory of God, Queen. If it was a king, it would say DG Rex, by the glory of God, King. Now, how does this relate to us? Well, if we start with our Church of England episcopate, remember John Wesley was part of the Church of England. In fact, John Wesley never wanted to split from the Church of England. But he had an issue when Methodism did begin to grow so big. Anglicans were what were known as nonconformists, which means we didn't follow the unity piece that was important for holding the whole church together. We wanted to worship in a slightly different manner. We wanted to have society meetings, bands meetings, class meetings, and all sorts of things along the line. So when Wesley's followers gather together, they simply get rid of the president. Not the president, the monarch. They have a president. But they get rid of the monarchy. And now what we have instead of a team of bishops is a conference. Okay, so this is initially when Wesley's just got his Methodists in Great Britain, or just his Methodists in America, all that happens is they just get a conference. This is before an era of general conferences and annual conferences. It's just a conference. And so you have the ministers and congregations. Often in early Methodism, there would be circuit riders. And that seat of theology that was the bishops is now the conference. So what happens when Wesley and his followers have a theological debate, all the Methodists come together for conference, and at conference they hash it out and come to a decision. So that is, these circuit riders who are at the church level who have conference, they go, they bring their delegates. There is a elected president or superintendent who is over the conference, but that seat of theology is now the conference. One of the things happening in England right now is the United Kingdom Methodist Church, the Methodist Church of Great Britain, is trying to create a covenant of agreement to work alongside, in a lot of places, the Church of England. Their biggest tension point is that in England, the bishops have the seat of theology. But an individual bishop has stay over his area. The issue they have is that the Methodists, though, don't have bishops at all. They just all come together to fulfill that theological role. So there's a bit of tension there. Now, when you get to today, though, you know, it was fine back in Wesley's day. They could have one conference and everyone come together. That's a little bit more difficult these days. So we have a conference. This is what we will call, in purple, an annual conference. So Oregon is an annual conference. Oregon Conference is purple. You will notice it's no longer blue. This is because there are now other conferences. So there's the Oregon Conference, there's the Pacific Northwest Conference, there's the Sierra Nevada Conference. In the Rockies, there's the River Conference. If you go to the East Coast, there's the Acts 1224 Conference, the Genesee Conference, the Wabash Conference. And we go to the South, there's the Gulf Coast Conference, there's the New Oasis Conference, the Southern California Conference. Now there's a whole lot, but here's the thing. One of these conferences on its own cannot change our theological stances. Okay? Thus, they do not have the power of the bishops anymore. What we have instead is a general conference. Now, what's interesting is we have called our presidents and superintendents of general conference bishops. So here's a confusing thing. Bishops in Free Methodism do not fulfill the role of the bishop, because the bishops are the seat of theology. In Free Methodism, General Conference is the seat of theology. The bishops simply preside over General Conference. So our bishops aren't actually bishops. They're like arch superintendents kind of thing. It's a little described, but my point is where the seat of theology is. Now, I could actually take a whole nother layer back on this and give you this picture multiple times with another circle appearing in the middle that is labeled World Conference. The World Conference is the only thing that can change the articles of religion. General Conference can change what is in Chapter 3 of the discipline. It can change what's in Chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the discipline. Annual conferences cannot do that. General Conference can. But only a World Conference can change our Constitution, which is Chapters 1 and 2. The articles of religion can only be changed by a World Conference, when all the Free Methodist General Conferences come together and do that. So don't expect the articles of religion to change anytime soon. So, Episcopacy in the local Free Methodist Church. That episcopacy that we see on a big scale also happens on a local scale in the Free Methodist Church. So we have all the people and all the ministries that are part of our church. There's the congregation, there's the members, there's the men's ministry, there's the women's ministry, there's the youth ministry, there's the people that just rent the building. They are underneath the society meeting. Remember, technically we don't have churches in Free Methodism, we have societies. Just a little bit of our lingo that you'll learn more about in kind of weeks 9, 10, 11, and so on. What you have is a society meeting, which only church members can vote in. So if you're just an average Joe who comes in, you can't vote. You know, if you're just building renters, you can't vote. But the members of the society who've but in through the memberships of who can vote. When they're not in session, they're represented by a board of administration. So it's a similar kind of episcopal structure there. There is then also, though, a relationship with that conference. Remember, what's in yellow here was on green in the previous ones. And here's that blue, conference. Well, it's actually what was purple on the last slide. And the relationship between the two is the conference gives their takes pastors to the society meeting, and the society meeting sends lay delegates to the conference. So the conference, being the seat of theology and the place where ordination is, grants word, sacrament, and order to the church. And the church contributes lay people to help be part of the discernment process for that in theology. So this is an interesting thing to remember. As a lay person, even as a deacon, you are a member of that society meeting. When you are a pastor, you are a member of the conference. So I am not a member of Falls City, even though I'm their pastor. I do not have a vote in their society meeting. And in board meetings, I have a vote only in the event of a tie. But I do have membership in the Oregon Conference. Now, at the same time, Angela is the delegate from Falls City. So she has her membership in Falls City, but she gets to sit in the conference. We in Free Methodism try to maintain one lay person for every ordained person in the conference. This keeps a really healthy balance between the local church and the conference. Keeps a really healthy balance between ordained theologians who can get a little bit white ivory tower and people who are in the dirt every day. We bring them all together. It's part of who we are. But so what does all this mean for us practically? Well, it means, as I just said, both ordained and lay people are involved at every level of the church decision making in Free Methodism. Even in the local church, the pastor is not the be-all and end-all. So if you look at all our conference boards, you'll find we have lay people and ordained people side by side. This also means that we have a balance between episcopal authority, top-down orders. So there are some things the bishops issue from the top of the chain. So like our latest change around of our ordination system came from the top down. Pure and simple. Top down. Okay? Top down. They said, we're not going to ordain that way, we're going to ordain this way now. Top came down. At the same time, congregational autonomy, bottom-up accountability happens. So the bishops and that can't get so detached from what's going on in the world because the lay people keep them accountable. Okay? But it also means some other things. So like, for example, if someone has an issue with a pastor, in a congregationalism, the congregation can just throw them out. In Free Methodism, you're a little more protected than that. You have a conference that can come along as a little bit of an outsider, can assess the situation, can help with restoration if needs be, can provide discipline if needs be. So we get both sides playing in there. So we just have this balance between top-down and bottom-up in all things. So a great example of this would be our discussions around homosexuality, around LGBTQ movements right now. The issue came from the bottom up. Lay people and pastors saying, we're having a problem with this. And it was met coming from the top down for the theology piece, and they met in the middle and discussed it. So it's not all top down, it's not all bottom up, it's both working side by side. It also means there is, though, an importance of networking and reaching outside of your local church. The local church does 99% of the ministry that happens in the church. Agreed. But our churches do not work alone. We support one another. When you get funds to help your church for something, that's come because the other churches in our conference have given that money through tithing and various things. In Free Methodism, your ministry picture is always bigger than your church. It is always bigger than your local church when you're a pastor in the Free Methodist Church. This means that though there is an importance of networking, of connecting with our pastors, reaching outside of just our local thing. The whole system breaks down if you isolate your church from the system. So keeping networked, staying plugged in, leaning on others, working together is an important part of who we are, because otherwise the system breaks down. And this also means, though, that there is a support system. So it's great. I'm out in Falls City right now, small church. I'm by myself pastoring, but I have other pastors I can go to and talk to and process things. I have a superintendent I can go to. I have a pastor of other church I can go and pick their brains, get ideas from them. So there is this support system for me. And that's all we have this week. It's a little bit shorter this week, 7 video set. So here are your assignments for the week. Your reading this week is boring, unless you like procedural reading. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to get it all there. It's going to take a lot to process. Don't sit there getting trapped by details. What I want for you to see is this main sweeping overview. You're going to read the discipline chapters 2, 4, 5, and 6. To keep it simple, chapter 2 is World Conference. Chapter 4 is General Conference. Chapter 5 is Annual Conference. And Chapter 6 is the local church. So you can see how that episcopal structure that we were talking about in those diagrams, each of those steps is in there. So number 2 is the world. 4 is General Conference. 5 is Annual Conference. 6 is the local church. So that episcopal structure is enshrined even in the chapters of our discipline. Don't get too bogged down on details, just kind of get a feel as to how it all hangs together. Understand the spirit of the discipline just as much as the letter of the discipline, if not more than the letter. And here are your discussion questions. And basically, we're just going to be processing and working through this stuff. So after reading the discipline chapters this week, A, what do you like about how the Free Methodist Church is organized? What do you like about this Episcopal conference structure? What do you not like, or what do you like least about that structure? Where are your issues with it? Briefly explain what you understand to be the process for appointing a new pastor to a church. Have your answer refer to both the outgoing and ingoing pastor. Hint, there's a paragraph to look at. And finally, what questions have arisen for you as you've read these chapters of the discipline? I'm going to give at least 3. Try and answer them in your discussions with one another if you can. If not, remember we have a face-to-face coming up this Saturday at Salem First, starting at 9 a.m. Initially, I said till 3 p.m., then I said till 2 p.m. I'm guessing with there being only a few of us, we'll get through the material fairly decently. So I definitely want to try and get you out of there by 2 at the latest, if not before. But with all that, have a great week. I will see you online, and I will see you on Saturday. Bye.